ואנו מכריזים בזאת
Hello, I'm Barrt Shaw. This is The View from Israel. Probably you're watching this program because you really want to keep up to date with unfolding events and get into the nitty gritty of what's happening here in Israel. And today we have a very special show. My special guest today has taken the quite remarkable initiative of not only introducing a new bill to the new Knesset, but even more remarkably, given the divisive nature of the Knesset today, has gotten his bill passed into law, which requires the vote not only of the majority, but members of the opposition as well. You might call it another miracle in the Holy Land, the political one this time. Now that I've got your attention, let me introduce you to my guest, Maurice Hirch. Maurice, welcome to The View from Israel.
Hi, Barry. Hi to the viewers.
Right, let me explain to our viewers here that you were the IDF military prosecutor in Judea and Samaria, and also as a lawyer, you were very familiar with what's legal and what's illegal in the territories, and also having a long professional and personal experiences in dealing with terrorists and their lawyers. Tell us something about your background as the military prosecutor in the territories.
So, as you said, I served in the IDF after making Aliyah from England for almost 20 years. I spent 5 years initially working in the general legal advice for Judea and Samaria, and then another 4 years in the prosecution for Judea and Samaria. Prosecution in Judea and Samaria deals predominantly with terrorist issues. I then spent a few years doing other general legal advice for the army, and in my final position, I served as the head of the military prosecution for Judea and Samaria, which is really the top of the pyramid, almost a district prosecutor, dealing with predominantly the terrorism cases.
And I guess you've come face to face with the reality, and you've come to your own conclusions of what is driving Palestinian terrorism. How would you define it from your personal experience and also legal perspective over there? Is it something because of illegal Israeli occupation, or is it to do more with incitement and propaganda?
So, as I often unfortunately quip, is that I did my career the wrong way round. Having retired from the army in 2017, I since joined Palestinian Media Watch, and suddenly you realize that everything I'd been doing until now in the army was focused solely almost on prosecuting and punishing terrorists for their terrorist acts. What I hadn't sufficiently looked into, I didn't truly understand what was driving the terrorists. I had some glances of it and some glints of it, but not really. I can give you an example. One day I'm sitting in a plea bargain negotiations with an Arab terrorist and his lawyer, and I suggested, based on the facts of the case, that the terrorist go to jail for 52 months. A week later, the lawyer comes back to me and says, my client has decided to reject your offer, and so we're going to have to do something else. So I said, fine, I'm happy, let's go to court. I believe that he'll get a higher sentence if we actually go to court. And he says, no, you didn't understand me. He doesn't want 52 months in jail. He wants 60 months in jail. I didn't understand this. I genuinely had the reputation of being almost Attila the Hun as the head of the prosecution, really, and I was considered to be quite harsh in punishments. And suddenly a terrorist wants more time in jail than I'm actually suggesting. In hindsight, I discovered after joining Palestinian Media Watch and getting into the details of the pay to slay program, the PA's terror reward policy, I finally understood that, well, if you're in jail for a year to 5 years, then you only get unemployment benefits after you're released from jail for the period that you were in prison. If you've spent 5 years in jail, i.e. 60 months as the terrorist requested, then suddenly you've got a pension for the rest of your life. And then you see this entire story playing out, and I think back and I understand, Now the penny is dropped. I understand what was driving the terrorists, and then you see other statements from terrorists saying, "Well, I'd spent 3 years in jail. I didn't really have enough money to finish building my house after I got married, so I planned another terrorist attack. I knew that I would get paid while I was in prison by the Palestinian Authority for my acts of terror. But more importantly, once released, I would thereafter have this pension for the rest of my life, and I would be able to afford a mortgage and to build a house." So that, on the one hand, a massive motivation for terrorism is the financial incentive, and then, as you said it, the incitement. When we dealt with the case, for example, of the murder of Daphne Meir, one of these like angels walking among us, murdered in January 2016 by a Palestinian miner. He told us as part of the investigation that in the morning he had been watching Palestinian television, and in the afternoon he got up and he went out and he broke into the settlement of Otniel, and there he stabbed Daphne repeatedly over and over again in front of her children. And I apologize, the graphic description, until the knife got stuck into her skull. And then he went home, washed his hands, and watched a film with his family. When I now understand again from the material that I've been exposed to in Palestinian Media Watch, that the entire system around this terrorist animal is pushing him to be a martyr, is pushing him to be a terrorist. The Jews stole your land. The Jews are the source of all evil. Israel has no right to exist. You can see where this isn't necessarily a nationally or nationalistically motivated crimes, but it's just simply a hate crime based on libels and lies that the Palestinian Authority peddles every single day ad nauseum, really. And with the new campaign that the Palestinian Media Watch recently released about save Palestinian children from their leaders, because the Palestinian leaders are basically sending their children to die. Firstly, they tell the children it's a good thing. You want to die for Palestine. They persuaded their parents. Now listen to this, Barry. This is truly sick. They've persuaded the parents of the children that they should be happy when their children die. It's good that they died. And then after all of that, they used the death of these children that they sent to die in order to attack Israel in the international fora. For the Palestinians, the deaths of these children is just a win. And if they manage to kill a few Jews along the way, it's just an even better win.
So that goes some way to doing it, but Maurice, share with me what got in your kishkis. What was your really motivation for putting together this legal petition to the Knesset to change the laws as it applies to punishment for terrorism? And I understand your petition was really concentrated more on Arab terrorists who had taken up or been given Israeli citizenship, rather than, let's say, what is known to most of the people as the Palestinian terrorists living under the control of the Palestinian Authority. Tell me about the motivation, and tell us about the difference between the identities of the two types of terrorists, if you want to put it that, but are they motivated by the same people, incited by the same people, etc.?
Okay, so to explain the motivation behind the legislation, it's a relatively easy task, but it has a few different steps. Number one, the Palestinian Authority sees all of the terrorists, including the Israeli Arab terrorists, as soldiers of the Palestinian cause, as soldiers of the Palestinian Authority. The terrorists themselves, including the Israeli Arab terrorists, see themselves as soldiers of the Palestinian Authority and of the Palestinian cause. They both see that they are, or claim that they are, entitled to the rights of prisoners of war under the Third Geneva Convention. They are soldiers. Now, that's the first step. Soldiers of a foreign entity. They see themselves as soldiers of the foreign entity, and that foreign entity regards them as their soldiers. As part of the pay-for-slay policy, the Palestinian Authority not only pays salaries also to the Israeli Arab terrorists, not only to the to the Arabs living in Judea and Samaria, but also to the Israeli Arab terrorists, and in fact pays an additional bonus to Israeli Arabs who are either residents of Jerusalem or Israeli Arab citizens full on. When I looked at this whole picture, you see that really what you're dealing with here is people, citizens of Israel, who have enlisted themselves in the army of a foreign and hostile entity and are acting on their behalf by carrying out acts of terror, and then really closing that deal by asking for and receiving the payment from the PA for carrying out those acts of terror. So when I was looking in one of my other positions in Israel, I'm also head of the National Advisory Committee for the cancellation of citizenship. So it's a field that I know quite well, to say it lightly. And so I came up with this idea based on really a study that I came across of European legislation, where 12 different countries in Europe have legislation that says that if you enlist in the armed forces of a foreign entity, that is the basis for stripping you of your citizenship. Now, this isn't made also in a vacuum, this type of legislation. It's based on Article 8 of the Convention for the Reduction of Statelessness from 1961, the UN Convention, which says that as a rule, people shouldn't be deprived of their citizenship if it leaves them stateless, unless, of course, they act in a manner which is contrary to their duty of loyalty to the country, and then accept a payment from that foreign entity in breach of the domestic law as part of that breach of loyalty. So really all of those things came together. International law, the UN Convention from 1961, state practice of the European countries that say that, well, if you enlist in the army of a foreign entity, not even necessarily a hostile entity, here we have Israeli Arab citizens or residents enlisting in the armed forces of a foreign hostile entity that's murdering Jews. And so there you have the galvanization already of all of those things together. And that was the background for the law. And that is what we presented also in the Knesset as the explanation for the law itself. As part of the discussions, we also presented recent research that really just came out, studying the 190 different countries in the world that have provisions for cancelling citizenship. Of them, 134 countries have the same idea of cancelling citizenship of a person for a breach of his duty of loyalty to the country. And so we showed that this wasn't only European state practice, but also really global practice of countries around the world. Among other things, also, we stressed the case of Shamima Begum. For those of your viewers who are not familiar with the name, Shamima Begum was a 15-year-old born and raised in England to Bangladeshi parents. In 2015, she took herself off to northern Syria and joined ISIS. And then in 2019, when she decided that she wanted to come back, the Home Secretary decided to cancel her citizenship. Now, because she'd been involved in terrorist activities. And so allegedly, of course, I don't have the proof for that, so I won't make the outright claim, but that was the basis for the decision. And Shamima Begum attacked the decision. She said, I'll be left stateless, so you can't cancel my citizenship. The British answered by saying that since you are a Bangladeshi, you were born to Bangladeshi parents, the law in Bangladesh would allow you to gain Bangladeshi citizenship, and therefore you won't be stateless. The Bangladeshi foreign minister weighed into the arguments and said, well, firstly, we will never give her citizenship. Secondly, we have a policy of zero tolerance for terror. So if she does ever step foot back in Bangladesh, we will put her on trial and she will be sentenced to death. And the British didn't care. The British said, we don't care. She is entitled to other status, and therefore we are cancelling her citizenship. Another stage of Shamima Begum's appeal was rejected by the Special Immigration Appeals Committee in England. And again, she will be left outside of England. The British didn't even allow her to come back in to appeal her case. And now her final appeal has been rejected by that appeals committee. So all of those things come together and say, well, if the other countries in the world are cancelling citizenship of terrorists who have breached their duty of loyalty to the country, well, why shouldn't Israel be any different? And if those Israeli terrorists are receiving a salary from this foreign entity, this foreign hostile entity, the Palestinian Authority that considers all of these Israeli Arab terrorists to be Palestinians, well, so why should Israeli law and Israeli policy prevent the Palestinians who see the terrorists as Palestinians and as their citizens? The Palestinians see them, the Arab terrorists see themselves as citizens of the Palestinian Authority and as Palestinian citizens. So why should Israeli law be the one that prevents them from realizing that desire? So that's the background that was provided for initiating the law, and in presenting the law also to the Knesset, the arguments that we presented in order to justify moving forward. And as you said last week, the legislation was passed or enacted, the bill was enacted into legislation and voted upon by 94 members of the Knesset. 94 out of 120 members of Knesset voted in favor of the law, with just 10 the Arab members of Knesset voting against it.
So, like I mentioned earlier, you did something that, you know, from follows the media is like virtually impossible, because the world is supposed to understand there is no cooperation going on between the opposition and the new government. But obviously, to get that sort of numbers, it must have been a cooperative venture between the current coalition government and the opposition. They must have voted for it as well.
Well, when you take into account, Barry, that the coalition at the moment only constitutes 64 people, and not all of them were in the Knesset at the time to vote in favor of the law, and it was passed, as I said, by 94 people. So you understand that there was a massive block of even the opposition that voted in favor of the law, and probably more would have come at the initial stages of the law. It was supported by 106 members of the Knesset. 4 members of the Labour Party said they were waiting to hear the recommendation of the ISA, of the Shabak, and the Shabak eventually recommended adopting the law. So really the law was supported in potential by 110 members of Israel's 120 parliament. Truly it's the most popular law that's passed in Israeli history, and it's something which was of complete consensus, even in a very, very divided Knesset at the moment.
This is quite remarkable. This actually compounds what I said at the beginning, that Israeli voters made their vote on the 2 issues to do with economic security and the physical and personal security. And what you, Maurice, have pioneered here is a new bill, a new act, which clearly defines the terrorists even from an Israeli perspective, the way it's never been clearly and legally defined before, and it's very important. Let me just ask you one question before I move on to the next subject, if I may. The point about deportation of terrorists with Israeli citizenships that have been found guilty and face deportation. Do they face deportation at the time after their sentence, or do they have to sit in an Israeli jail for several years and then be deported?
Oh, so that's the part of the law that I didn't necessarily explain. What the law says, that who are the people who are the Israeli Arab terrorists whose citizenship can be cancelled? It's terrorists or people who have been convicted of 1, committing a terrorist offence. 2, were sentenced to a full prison service, not just a suspended prison sentence, but really a full prison sentence. And 3, then received money from the Palestinian Authority whilst in prison as a reward for their acts of terrorism. What the law then says is that those terrorists will be deprived of their citizenship, and so when they then finish their prison sentence, they will then be deported because they no longer have status or reason to be in Israel. They will then be deported to the Palestinian Authority controlled areas or to Gaza.
I think that will probably make a lot of my viewers very unhappy about that, because what it means is Israel has to pay for their prison centers, their food and everything, probably get education as well. They're getting paid by the Palestinian Authority for their services to the Palestinian Authority by murdering Jews. So they're living quite comfortably. But when it comes to the time of the deportation, what happens if somebody says, yeah, well, I have a wife and children? I understand part of this is the family do not get deported, only the terrorist.
So here the answer is very simple, that any wife child is invited to join them.
But in the meantime, Israel has to pay. I suppose it's true, because I guess the wife and or parents of the terrorists would say they haven't committed any terrorist act. They're entitled to keep their Israeli citizenship.
But let's put that a little bit into context, Barry, as well, with some statistics for the viewers. 70 to 75% of the terrorists are single, right? They're not married. They don't have children. That's generally the profile of the terrorists, which is also one of the explanations why these terror payments are just a terror reward. They're not social benefits, because these people were never the sole providers for families of 10 people. They were just another child on the way who's just involved in terrorism, and the money they're being paid is just a reward for the terrorism. So that's on the first level. On the second level, and here I have to say that this needs to be clear as well. I anticipate, and we anticipate, that this law will not necessarily be enacted and used against so many people. I have to say that's our honest hope, because our hope is that just with the deterrence that the law will create, the fear of the Israeli citizens losing their citizenship and being deported to Gaza or Ramallah, we're hoping that in and of itself will cut the link between the Israeli Arab terrorists and the Palestinian Authority. And once you take away, as I said at the start, once you take away that financial incentive, and as we discussed, and you correctly asked, well, is there a different incentive and driving motivation for the Israeli Arab terrorists as opposed to the Arabs living in Judea and Samaria or Gaza? The answer is no. It's the same incitement that drives them to terrorism. It's the same terror reward program that drives them to terrorism. So if we can at least neutralize the effect and any possible benefit that they could possibly have achieved from receiving a salary from the Palestinian Authority as a reward for their acts of terrorism, then we believe that the law will have created a tremendous deterrent effect and really achieved 99% of its goal without even getting to the point where anyone loses their citizenship or is even deported.
Would it be fair to say that had you presented your petition to the Knesset during the previous Lapid-Ganz government, it wouldn't have gotten so far?
Well, unfortunately, here you're playing into historical fact. The bill was originally written and introduced just about 2 years ago, before the Bennett-Lapid government was formed. It was even signed at the time, as the Knesset was just elected and before they formed the government. It was signed by 42 members of the Knesset, including what would then be 7 ministers of the Bennett-Lapid government. But once they formed the government, they then voted against the law on 4 different occasions. So it's definitely not something unreasonable to argue that this law would never have gone so far under that government, even though now I have to say, to their credit, they all voted for the law.
Excellent. Talk to me about the money that Benny Gantz gifted to Mahmoud Abbas and why it was wrong. I think you know which money I'm talking about.
Okay, So now we're talking about August 2021. August 2021, the have to roll back a little bit. In July 2018, Palestinian Media Watch was again, and myself obviously, heavily involved in passing Israel's anti-pay for slay law. What does that mean? We have this PA policy of paying salaries to terrorists. So the law that was passed in 2018 said that every year Israel collects money, tax money, according to the Oslo Accords, and gives it to the Palestinian Authority. That money is 65 to 70% of their operating budget every year. And therefore, since they're using that money to pay salaries to terrorists, what we're going to do is every year we will take off from those monies an amount equivalent to the amount that the PA paid in the previous year to terrorists, i.e. in 2018, and they paid 651 million shekels to terrorists. In 2019, Israel took off 651 million shekel from the taxes that it gathered, or that it collected, and passed the Palestinian Authority. After a few years of this law working, and when you then mix in the effects of Corona, in the summer of 2021, the PA was really on the ropes. They were almost facing a financial ruin. The government had just passed another decision to implement the law and take off another 600 million shekel, and then stepped in Benny Ganz and Naftali Bennett and said, even though our right hand is taking away 600 million shekel, with our left hand, we're going to give you the money back. Completely undermining and circumventing the law, using different budgetary provisions. We would argue that they even used the money that was taken off in previous years in order to fund this loan. And really at that stage, August 2021, Benny Ganz saves the Palestinian Authority from complete ruin. Now, I'm just now working on a new report, and so one of the messages that we give over in the report is how aid to the Palestinian Authority doesn't buy peace, doesn't promote peace, but really it promotes terrorism. So we're taking an idea of how many people have been killed as a direct result of Palestinian terrorism since, for example, the United States, the Biden administration renewed its funding to the Palestinian Authority. $1 billion and 57 people murdered. Since Benny Ganz saved the Palestinian Authority in August 2021, 42 people have been murdered. That's something which has to be taken into account. When you feed this terror beast, people die. And that's something which we will be writing about very soon. And it's something which I think that governments and foreign governments definitely need to take into account.
I want our viewers to know that when Benny Gantz was the Deputy Prime Minister under Lapid and also the Defense Minister, he actually invited Mahmoud Abbas to his home in Rosh Hashanah. And instead of the visitor coming with gifts to his host, the host actually gifted Mahmoud Abbas with huge sums of money to get him out of the ditch that he'd put himself in. But also, not only that, but he also gifted Mahmoud Abbas with huge tracts of land, which was Israeli designated land in Judea, particularly in Area C, which according to the Oslo Accord remains under full and sole Israeli jurisdiction, both civil and security, until any such time that any Palestinian leadership or whatever is prepared to make the necessary compromises for peace and fully accept the right of the Jewish people to live in the land of Israel instead of pursuing a Palestine from the river to the sea. And yet, talk to me, as much as you know, about the huge amount of land that Benny Ganz gifted to Mahmoud Abbas in Area C, which is off the main road leading from Jerusalem to the Dead Sea. For those of you who know the map of Israel, huge strategically important land for building at least 4,000 homes in Area C for Palestinians, which goes completely against the spirit and the law of the Oslo Accord signed by the Palestinians, by the Israeli leadership, by the American administration, and witnessed by the European Union.
So really, as you described it, Barry, in that fateful meeting in Rosh Hashanah, Benny Ganz gave Mahmoud Abbas 3 presents. The first one was hundreds of millions of shekels, continue paying salaries to terrorists, and Benny Ganz, I'll fund it. Now, it's not only Benny Ganz has to be taken into account, it was the Bennett-Lapid government. They bear just as much responsibility, of course, as he does. So present number 1, 600 million shekels. Present number 2 were the building permits in Area C. What happens is that since the Palestinian Prime Minister, Salam Fayyad, already 7, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, we have been dealing with a situation where the Palestinians are intentionally building illegal structures in Area C as part of a land grab. Now, they're doing that in strategic points. They're doing it in areas that surround Jerusalem and is designed to have a stranglehold on Jerusalem, and in other strategic areas, predominantly on high grounds. What Benny Ganz did in that same meeting is he then gave Mahmoud Abbas permission and really legalized thousands of units of illegal building in 2 areas. One, south of Jerusalem, coming towards Bethlehem, and the other going out north of Jerusalem by Chizmeh, really putting an entire stranglehold on Jerusalem and providing the Palestinians what they like to call this continuity of the Palestinian state. And what Benny Ganz was really doing was blocking the development of Jerusalem, both north and southwards, as the prophets say, Jerusalem will grow and really develop in the time of the redemption. And Benny Ganz is trying to stop that on both sides. And he's allowing the land grabs to turn into legal building and a legal stranglehold around Jerusalem. The third present that he gave was to allow 5,000 Palestinians to receive Palestinian residency cards, which, as the Palestinians described it, it isn't only those 5,000 people, it's those people and their families. And the PA admitted that really what Benny Ganz had done was to provide and to really enact the Palestinian right of return for 40,000 Palestinians. That's something which is really unprecedented, definitely in its numbers. That's also one of these final status negotiating subjects. What will happen to the refugees? And here Benny Ganz said, you know what, have a present, pay salaries to the murderers of our children, build illegal houses and strangle Jerusalem, and enact the Palestinian right of return. Really a disastrous decisions on every single one of those fronts.
And can you give me any detail of what Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority are giving Israel in return for the money and for the land that we've given them?
100%. I referred to it just before. In return for the 600 million shekel and the 5,000 residency permits, the 40,000, Palestinians now realizing their so-called right of return, and in return for the legalizing the Israeli building, the Palestinians have given Israel 57 dead bodies and hundreds of other people injured in thousands of terrorist attacks going on throughout the time. That has been Mahmoud Abbas's response. Nothing else that is he given. He hasn't given anything as regards to the international community. He's pushed forward in the ICC against Israel and in the UN with the recent decision of the referral of the situation in Palestine to the International Court of Justice. He's created and sent his Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades, the terrorist wing of Fatah, headed by Mahmoud Abbas. He's sent them out to murder Jews. We've published over the last year and a half, Palestinian Media Watch has published multiple and repeated reports of how the Palestinian Authority is really happy about the fact that the Palestinian security forces, those same people who are meant to be fighting terror, are actually policemen by day and terrorists by night. That has been Mahmoud Abbas's response, which is why I say that when you fund the terrorism, when you feed this beast of terrorism, the response is not to placate them and to achieve peace. The response has been a massive upturn in terrorism and a massive rise to again, for many years, Israel hasn't had as bloody a year in being slaughtered by Palestinian terrorists and injured by Palestinian terrorists, and that has been the result of that really fundamentally wrong policy.
Maurice, then, how do you answer the talk from, for instance, Thomas Knight, the United States ambassador to Israel, and even President Biden, that these steps taken by people like Bennetts only is to advance towards a two-state solution between Israel and a Palestinian state?
Well, any one of these people who still talks about the idea of a two-state solution is simply blind to reality. If they haven't yet seen it, then I recommend go to PalWatch, www.palwatch.org, and just look at our entire category of Palestinian denial of Israel's right to exist. The Palestinians do not believe in a two-state solution. They believe in a one-state solution where Palestine, Arab Palestine, is Judenfrei, implementing the Nazi ideology. And Ambassador Knight and Secretary Blinken and President Biden, as much as they would like to try and believe, well, really the Palestinians just want peace, that's simply not the reality. And I think it's impossible to argue when Israel has 57 dead victims of terrorism and thousands more injured after America renewed the aid that President Trump had stopped to the Palestinian Authority. By the way, just as for comparison, in the 2 years prior to the renewal of aid, where Israel was implementing the anti-pay for slay law on a regular basis, and America, the Trump administration, stopped the aid to the Palestinian Authority, there were 14 victims of Palestinian terrorism. So really, when there was no money flowing to the Palestinian Authority, terrorism went down. When you return the free flow of money to murder Jews to the Palestinian Authority, so then the result that you have is 57 victims. And so for Ambassador Knight to continue harping on about that idea of a two-state solution is, I think, just willful blindness. It's just not seeing the reality as it is. How can you still argue after 30 years trying to implement the Oslo Accords, where the Palestinians constantly teach their children on a daily basis that Israel has no right to exist. Palestine is from the river to the sea. Palestine is all of Israel. How can you still argue that they're interested in a two-state solution?
This is why they're forcing people, usually from one side of the political perspective over here, to make these advances towards the Palestinians, and they're continuing, from my research into the subject, which dates back even to Yasser Arafat, what they call, the Palestinians call, the staged destruction of Israel. They do it like slicing up salami, one slice after the other. They're very patient and very methodical in what they're doing. And viewers, I do urge you to do what Maurice says. and go to the Palestine Media Watch website. We'll put up the link over here. Read through what they're saying, what the Palestinians are saying in Arabic to their own people, not what they're saying to English to the Americans or the British or any other language in Europe. And that's where the truth lies. Palestinian Media Watch has been researching and putting out this material. I urge you to learn it, to study it, and really understand the truth of what Maurice and I have been saying over here, because that's where the facts lie and that's where the truth lies. And it's about time the international diplomatic community woke up and stopped feeding some sort of delusion, which I call the two-state solution, is what I call the dead camel of peace, which was killed not by us, but our enemies. And the people like Nides and people like this are trying to drag this dead camel through the burning sands of the Middle East, because through their hysteric mind, they can see some distant oasis called peace. It's an illusion. It's a delusion. The truth lies in what you will hear from me and what you will be able to read and see on the Palestine Media Watch website. Maurice, I want to thank you and I want to praise you for the initiative you have just taken in the new government. And I think you were one of the first people, first individuals that managed to get a consensus between the government and the opposition, which, if the media shows, are not talking to each other. But on things like Israeli security, you have made a progress which I would have thought impossible up till now. So as we say in Hebrew, Maurice, kol hakavod, all power to your elbow. When you get any further initiatives, I want you to come back and talk to our viewers about what are the progress you're making.
Thank you very much. I'll happily do that, Barry.
And to you, the viewers, thank you for watching Maurice, and for me, The View from Israel, with one plea. Please, please share this video. It's vitally important. Anybody who disapproves or can argue against the arguments put up by Maurice, contact me, viewfromisrael@gmail.com, or on social media, or Palestine Media Watch, and prove to us, if you can, that what we have told you today has no relevance in truth, because this is what they're doing, and we will send you, and Palestinian Media Watch will send you exactly what the Palestinians are saying among themselves today, which echo what you heard from Maurice. Thank you for being with us. This is Barrt Shaw saying Shalom from Israel, The View from Israel.
אנו מכריזים בזאת